Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Sarah Cott, SVP of Programming at The Hill. Thank you to everyone joining us online and in the room for our event, the 20% Small Business Tax Deduction, Why It Matters and What's Next. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, for their support of this discussion. Small businesses are one of the bedrocks of the U.S. economy, employing nearly half of the American workforce and representing over 40% of the country's GDP. Challenges like inflation and high supply costs have plagued small businesses for years. And now, an important small business tax provision is set to expire next year. Created as part of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or the TCJA, the 20% small business tax deduction allows small business owners to deduct up to 20% of their business income. The TCJA made corporate tax cuts permanent, but the 20% small business tax deduction is set to expire at the end of the year. What would this tax hike mean for small businesses across the country? What will the economic fallout be if it expires? And what else should be done to help America's 33 million small businesses? Before we get underway, a few housekeeping rules. If you're with us here in the room, please turn your cell phones to silent for the duration of the program, but please join our conversation online. You can follow us on Facebook, X, and Instagram at The Hill Events using the hashtag HillEconomy. And with that, I am delighted to begin the program with our first interview, a bipartisan one. Please welcome The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, in conversation with Congressman Lloyd Smucker, a Republican from Pennsylvania, a member of the Ways and Means Committee and lead sponsor of the Main Street Tax Certainty Act, and Congressman Brad Schneider, a Democrat from Illinois and a fellow member of the Ways and Means Committee. Thank you, Bob.
Well, thanks Sarah. And thanks for joining us. Got a good crowd today. It's been 2 weeks since the election. Congressman, start with you. Kind of thoughts about it. We're still digesting it. And what are the chances for bipartisanship? Because obviously Republicans have the trifecta.
Yeah, so thank you for having us here, and I'm glad to be here with my friend Brad Schneider. I think there's perhaps an historic opportunity here because we do have, we're going to be seeing the largest tax policy package put forward since 2017. And sure, we have budget reconciliation that perhaps we can use, and probably that's the intent.
Right.
But I do think there's a real opportunity to do this in a bipartisan way. You see some hints of that on the Ways and Means Committee. We've worked together on a number of issues in the past session. And we have, I think, a general broad agreement on some facts as it relates to tax. We want an economy that is working for the American people. We want more people to be able to participate in the economy. We want an economy that incentivizes business development. We want to make it easier to start a new business, and then incentivizes additional investment. We want to make it easier to grow a business. We know that creates the jobs that are really, really important. And so I think, I know Brad and I, there's a lot of things that we agree on. And I hope as we work through this, that we are able to agree on key provisions of our policy. We know that if we do this together in a bipartisan way, it's going to have a lasting hold and a lasting effect. And so, again, we'll probably be doing this through reconciliation, but hopefully we can agree on many broad provisions.
Congressman Schneider, your thoughts?
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me. It's good to be with all of you. As Lloyd said, we work well together. We're both on the Ways and Means Committee. We both are on the third floor of Cannon. Our offices are, in fact, next to each other. And so it's a good relationship. Lloyd, I'll start where Lloyd finished, is if we do it the right way, if we do it in a bipartisan way, it's more likely that what we do will stand the test of time. And if we do it the wrong way, and I would argue that reconciliation, at least starting down the path of reconciliation, is a step off the wrong foot. I'll put it that way. And we are where we are in 2025, revisiting the 2017 tax bill, because it wasn't bipartisan. We didn't have the deliberations and discussions and the work to try to make sure we smooth out the wrinkles. And we are where we are in this conversation about how do we help small businesses, because in 2017, small businesses were more of an afterthought than a focus. And we need to focus on small businesses. They are the heartbeat of our communities. I don't care if it's a rural community or a large urban community. If you walk down Main Street, on either of those communities, what you're going to see are small businesses, people who are trying to make a living, provide for their families, and improve their communities. And if we can do more, whether it is giving them stability in tax policy, stability in regulatory policy, making it easier for them to start their business, to run their business, to hire people, train people, develop them, and spin off more businesses as they do that, the better we do that, the better we grow our economy. So my hope, and I said this 8 years ago when Kevin Brady was chair of Ways and Means, and we were not on Ways and Means, but I said to Kevin, let's talk. I'm gettable. As a Democrat, there are things that we agree on, and I'll say the same thing now. There are things I know, working so closely with Lloyd, there are things that we agree on, in particular when it comes to helping small businesses. Let's try to work together to create a bill that can actually not last 8 years and have to revisit this again, but can last a generation and give those businesses the stability and predictability they need.
Congressman Smucker, let's talk about your legislation. It's bipartisan, 192 co-sponsors, the Main Street Tax Certainty Act. Can you talk a little bit about it and how its path will be? Obviously, everyone in this room is going to be very busy in 2025 with this massive tax bill. But how does it fit into the conversation, and what do you see the prospects of it are? Because even though the tax cuts were passed in a partisan way, just like the Affordable Care Act was through reconciliation, there are some bipartisan ideas within it, like economic opportunities and opportunity zones.
Sure. Well, let's go back to Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And what we wanted, one of the key goals of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was to allow our large corporations to compete across the world. And at that time, at 39%, our corporate rate was a lot higher than most other countries around the world. And we had seen a lot of inversions where corporations were moving their headquarters overseas and taking jobs and tax dollars with that. And so bringing down the rate was an important proponent of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which worked. Mm-hmm. Billions of dollars, probably trillions of dollars reinvested back into the economy here, jobs created here. But then that put us in a position of ensuring that our Main Street businesses, and I think Brad described them very, very well. These are the businesses that are the cornerstone of our communities, and they employ most of our workers, create most of our jobs. These are pass-through organizations, so the tax structure is different. So this is your C corps, or I'm sorry, your S corps, your partnerships, your sole proprietors and LLCs. So the tax structure is different, and we want a tax structure that allows them to be able to be a level playing field and be able to compete with the Cs. And so the idea of the 199A, which was based on a provision 199 that had been in place in the tax code, was to do just that, to bring that top rate, that top individual rate down for those who have K-1 income, and provide a deduction across the top. And I think, again, it worked very, very, very well. It incentivized the kind of growth that we want to see. I have, it's the bill that I've introduced this cycle. It was Jason Smith's bill last cycle, but also head of the tax team, specifically focused on small business finance, small business tax structure. And we've held multiple roundtables, and we've heard from small business owners how those additional dollars back in their pockets allowed them to reinvest in their businesses, reinvest in their workers, and reinvest in their communities. Mm-hmm. And the impact it would have if we allow this to expire. If we allow this and the individual rates to expire, it'll be the largest tax increase in our history. And so our goal, of course, is to make this permanent, to provide the kind of predictability that small business owners want to see. And so it's a key provision of our agenda on what we think this tax policy, this tax package should look like. And as you mentioned, we have, I think, 192 sponsors now, a few Democrats on it as well.
Right.
Hopefully Brad will join us soon, but
That's my next question.
That's to be seen. But so there's some bipartisan support for the idea because people see and they hear from their businesses. They see the impact of these businesses on their communities. The health of these businesses is critical to the health of our communities, and they're hearing from their business owners.
Well, Congressman Schneider, there are 2 Democrats on it, but you are not a formal co-sponsor. Are you gettable on this?
I'm gettable on just about any bill. I think it's more the principle. What are we trying to accomplish? And I think the key is understanding that there is a difference, as Lloyd talked about, between large businesses, C corporations, multinationals, and small businesses, whether they're family-owned or privately owned, whatever the case may be. A pass-through entity, for the most part, is going to be very different than what you're seeing in the multinationals. And I've had the privilege of working both in large corporations as well as owning my own business and advising small businesses. I know when I was getting my MBA in the finance course, the corporate finance course, the professor asked the question, what is the right ratio of debt to equity to maximize returns? And it was a trick question because for a large corporation, the right ratio is 100% debt. The balance is the risk of default, but for large corporations, you're not risking your family farm in doing so. It's an entirely different world. The calculus is different, the formulations. For the closely held and family-owned business, first of all, they don't have access to the same capital markets. So for a small business, the key things that they require is a business model, access to talent, access to capital, and access to a stable business environment or stable political environment. And they don't have the same way to go to market for capital. They're either going to family and friends. They may be going to their local banks. Community banks are shrinking. Their opportunities are less. And they're going to have a group of advisors that are part of their team in a very different way than a large corporation. So maintaining that ability to be a LLC, to be an S Corp, to be a partnership, and to keep that closeness, to access that capital and invest in their people, in their products, in their adding a plant, whatever the case may be, in doing it in a way that is not the same as these large companies. That's why it's so important that we have a Main Street strategy. And so as to whether I'm gettable, I'm open to any discussion. My philosophy has always been I'll work with anyone who has a good idea, open mind, and a willingness to work together to solve our problems.
Congressman, just want to follow up on Republicans. It's a good problem to have. You've got the levers of power, but they're small majorities. And unlike extending the Bush tax cuts, that was divided government, and now you have the option of reconciliation. And there are a lot of things that President-elect Trump promised that would not only extend the tax cuts, but go beyond that, not taxing tips, not taxing Social Security. How do you afford all this, especially when a lot of Republicans are saying we need a big increase in spending in defense, but there's been no indication that Trump wants to touch Medicare, Medicaid, or Social Security?
Sure. So I think the situation is different than it was in 2017. We now have, we're at almost $36 trillion in debt, growing at about $2 trillion per year. Many of us know that, probably all of us know that that is completely unsustainable going forward.
Right.
It's the most predictable crisis that we can see coming because we've seen it happen many times throughout our history. And so we're now debating tax policy in the context of that environment, which again is different than it was in 2000. We had debt in 2017, but we've added
pre-COVID
trillions of dollars since then. And so one of the key questions in this, and I can't say that I have the answer on this today, but we have to look at what it's going to do to our debt picture going forward, what it's going to do to our debt to equity ratio. And I'll say this: we have time, but we've got to, we're running out of time. The problem is solvable. We're at our highest debt to equity ratio than we've seen since the end of World War II. It took about 30 years after the end of World War II to work our way out of that. We get down to about a 20-30% debt to equity ratio by the mid 70s. And by the way, that was after we had to ramp up and during World War II. And today we're in a most dangerous environment geopolitically than what we've seen since World War II. And so, the question is, what is the impact of having this massive debt now if we're forced to confront problems around the world. But we've got to be thinking about that in the context of our tax policy. One of the only ways we can begin to change the trajectory is to have strong fiscal growth.
Okay.
CBO currently is projecting that our growth will only average about 1.6% on average for each of the next 30 years, compared to historic average of about 3%. And we've got to figure out a way to get our economic growth back up to closer to our historic norm. We have demographic issues. That's why we need immigration. We need more workers in the system. But we also have some technologies, AI and robotics, that could really improve productivity. So we have, I think, some hope on the horizon. But this is why tax policy is so critical at this time. We've got to have the right tax policy in place that incentivizes businesses to take risk and to grow the economy, and then generate additional revenue. Back to your original question, there's a larger framework here that I think I can speak for many Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee that we're going to be thinking about, and we want to ensure that we're changing our fiscal trajectory going forward, not adding to the debt burden that exists today.
Congressman Schneider, what do you think?
I agree with Lloyd. I'm very concerned about our debt. It may be appropriate that I'm sitting to the right of Lloyd on this issue.
To their left.
It's all on how you look at it, right?
It's all how you look at it. But, and I may have primed Lloyd when I was talking about debt to equity, but our debt to GDP we're approaching 100%, and it's going to continue to grow beyond the size of our GDP. But the difference between coming out of World War II, where we were the only literally standing power, where we didn't have massive trade deficits, where we didn't have near peers in technologies and other industries. We had a population that was growing. We had productivity gains that were leading to new ideas and new developments. I don't see a path to go from 1-2% growth, and maybe we can get up to 3%, but we're not going to be at the 5-6% growth. We're also talking about a larger economy. It gets harder. We are spending more on debt service today than any other line in our discretionary budget, more than on defense, more than all other discretionary spending. And that number is only expected to grow. And I usually do this in high schools, and it's easier to do in DC, but I'll try to use the analogy here. If $1 million was represented by a football field, all right, and we just added football field to football field, $1 billion would be about the distance from the Commander Stadium to the Ravens Stadium. But $1 trillion goes around the earth 2.25 times. Okay, pause to think about that as we sit with $36 trillion debt, and the CBO is projecting $50 trillion debt within a decade. Now, I was talking before about what do small businesses need? Access to talent, access to capital. If our economy isn't growing, if our government and government spending is squeezing out the access to capital for small businesses, we're not bringing in immigrants into this nation who have the skills we need to grow our businesses, to start our businesses, then we are hampering ourselves in the ability to tackle the challenges we face. Our national debt is one of our greatest risks we face as a country. And Lloyd was talking about the other threats we face. At the end of World War II, we were the dominant power. As we head into 2025, we are facing threats from China, from Russia, from Iran, from Korea. And all of them are challenging us economically and militarily. So tackling our debt and how we do it with our debt policy, our tax policy, becomes of paramount importance. And I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. We can go down a partisan path, and I said this when I thought the Democrats were going to take the majority. It would have been wrong to do for the Democrats. I think it's equally wrong to do for the Republicans. We have to find a bipartisan way to responsibly fund our government, decide where it is we want to invest, and make sure we secure our children's future and our community's growth and strength.
We just have a minute left. I want to get 30 seconds each. What does your crystal ball say? I would think that maybe enjoy Christmas this year, but next year is going to be pretty rough because these things come down to the wire. Do you think that it's going to be done at the last second, or do you think that possibly some type of extension with add-ons could be done earlier next year?
Let me go first.
Yes, okay.
I'm going to let you close. I think if you let Lloyd and me sit down and do our work together, if you let us roll up our sleeves, we can just bang on the door next to each other. And if you let the other members, and it's the majority who think like we do, that we won't get everything we want, but we're willing to work together and try to move forward together, we can be done by Thanksgiving. Forget about New Year's. If it is going to be a four corners, dig in, everyone fight, and your victory is my defeat, win-lose rather than win-win, we're going to be having Christmas dinner here.
Give me the last word.
So I think Trump feels he has a mandate. You know, he won the popular vote as well as with 312 electoral votes. He's going to want to move quickly. And I agree completely with Brad. I wish that we could. I hope that we continue to work together. We've worked together on a number of issues, but frankly, the path is probably a reconciliation bill, and that probably gets done by April or May.
April or May.
I would think. I would guess. I could be completely wrong on that, but I just think there's a lot of work being done. We've already done a lot of work in the event that we were given the opportunity to have the majority. We are, people are digging in right now. We're going to continue to do that. We want to be ready to go by the time the president takes office on January 20th, and we'll be moving quickly down the path.
Okay, we shall see with that prediction. Please thank our two lawmakers for joining us this morning.
It is now time for our sponsor segment, which will start with a short video from NFIB.
Motivated,
ambitious,
hardworking,
resilient. Americans' millions of small businesses are the foundation of our economy.
The 20% small business tax deduction allows us to compete with the larger corporations.
Allows us to hire more employees.
Allows us to attract new customers. Unfortunately, this deduction is expiring at the end of 2025.
We need our elected representatives to act and make the 20% small business tax deduction permanent, just like they permanently lowered the corporate tax rate.
The 20% small business tax deduction is good for small businesses.
And what's good for small business
is good for America.
Please join the more than 30 million American small businesses.
Like me.
Like me.
Like me. Like me.
Tell Congress to make the 20% small business tax deduction permanent.
Now for more from our sponsor, please welcome Adam Temple, Senior Vice President of Advocacy at the National Federation of Independent Business, in conversation with Kathleen Koch, contributing editor to The Hill.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Adam. First, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about the NFIB? How are you different from, say, the Small Business Administration, Chamber of Commerce?
Sure. So NFIB, or the National Federation of Independent Business, is what we call the voice of small business, because it is. We are nonprofit, we're nonpartisan, and we're member-directed, meaning our legislative priorities are directed by our members. We survey them, they tell us what is most important to them, and those are the ones on which we advocate. And right now that is the 20% small business tax deduction, which is why we are here today, because we feel like it is the top priority among our members and the one in which we're fighting for.
I thought that was pretty interesting. I was just chatting with one of your members from Nebraska about that, and she said, yes, we decide what the priorities are, and then you advocate for them. Well, I want to talk about the 20% small business deduction, and how it's impacting your members. But first, I'd like to give you a chance to comment if you had any thoughts on what the congressman just said.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and I really appreciate their time coming here today. But what you heard is that there are definitely differing maybe perspectives or priorities, but the one thing that they agree on, and they both had a really healthy understanding of what a small business is. These are not, large, big employers all the time. They're the mom and pops. They both seem to understand that. But regardless of how we get there or what next year looks like, this is a priority, and this is what they both understand the impact on small business. So that was encouraging to hear, and hopefully that turns into action.
So let's talk about your members, and I think we have several of them in the room, and they're going to be coming up and talking after us.
Yeah.
What are they telling you? How is this impacting them?
Well, what we hear when we meet with them around the country is that they've been able to add jobs, they've been able to grow their businesses, it helped them survive a pandemic. And it helps them reinvest back in their communities. So what we have learned, that's on sort of the anecdotal side. On the data side, EY did a study that just diving into what it would look like if the small business tax deduction was made permanent. What it found was that in the first 10 years, $750 billion in GDP would be added, that 1.2 million jobs per year would be added. And interestingly enough, in 2021, 26 million small businesses were able to claim this deduction. That's not 26 million businesses, but specifically small, not all of the ones that claim the deduction. So, 26 million small businesses is really hard to ignore, and that was just in 2021. So it'll be interesting to see as we progress, and if it's made permanent, how many more will benefit from it.
So just so I understand, so there are going to be these additional jobs. So I guess what you're saying is this would give businesses, if it were made permanent, the ability to really plan ahead.
Absolutely. Planning is huge. And let's not pretend like we have, again, a mom and pop, they're trying to make it through the next month, the next year, but they need to be able to have some level of certainty that they're going to be able to do that. Right now, if you look, the NFIB uncertainty index peaked in October. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the future looks like, and a lot of this is because they don't know what their taxes are going to look like after 2025. So the ability to give them more certainty that this is going to be locked in, it is something that they can rely on, they're going to continue to execute on those plans, versus if it goes away, they'll have to, or if they, with the lack of certainty that it might not stay, they'll have to make alternative plans or cut back.
In chatting with one of your members over there, she did say right now small businesses around the country are struggling because they can't plan. They don't know what's going to happen after next year.
Yeah. And in an NFIB survey that we did among our members, what they told us was that if it's not made permanent, if it's allowed to expire, that 44% of them will postpone or cancel capital investments. More than a third of them will have to postpone or cancel hiring. And in a time where inflation is a huge issue for all Americans, not just small businesses, 61% said they would have to look at raising prices. So that would have an impact across the economy.
That's just what I was going to ask you. How would that impact the economy?
I mean, obviously, if your goods, and we talk about goods a lot of times, but remember, this is goods and services. This is mom and pop, coffee shops, retailers and things like that. But this is also your CPAs, your attorneys, a lot of those other goods and services type companies, and they're going to have to look at raising prices to be able to account for not having this tax deduction.
Now, the solution, Congressman Smucker is one of the co-sponsors, and I don't know that he went into great detail, but could you explain to us exactly what it would do? Is this a lengthy piece of legislation or something pretty simple?
The legislation, the Main Street Tax Certainty Act, is a very simple piece of legislation. It just says make it permanent. That's obviously my summary.
Okay.
But
it's not really just one sentence.
It doesn't open it back.
That's impossible in Washington.
But it's by Washington standards, it's pretty succinct.
Okay.
It simply makes it permanent. And so whether, that's the vehicle with which this is done or some other way, they talked about a whole lot of ways this might be able to happen. The priority is clearly that we need to make it permanent so that small businesses can continue to hire, invest in their businesses, expand, keep prices low, and invest back in their communities. That was another thing that both congressmen noted is these are the folks that are sponsoring the baseball teams, that are giving back to the local PTAs, doing those sorts of things. And so it allowed them to continue to contribute to their economies and their local communities in a way that we haven't been able to see before.
So based on not only what you heard here in the room, but your contact with lawmakers across Capitol Hill, how optimistic is NFIB that it will pass?
Well, I mean, you heard it today. Well, prognostication, especially after an election, can be a pretty scary proposition. But the encouraging thing is it's a no-brainer that people know that this helps small businesses, and people know that if it's not made permanent, they will be hurt by it. It's just how we get there. We have almost 200 bipartisan co-sponsors on the bill as the way it currently is. You heard bipartisan support for the principle today. So I think there's optimism. It's just how we get there and how quickly we get there. But we think that regardless of where you're coming from in Washington, you can see the benefit and why this is so important.
Right. You say how quickly we get there. I guess so that means getting Congress to make this a priority. It may be the top priority for your members, but not necessarily for them.
Well, absolutely, but that's why we're here. I mean, remember, 26 million small businesses. That's also 26 million constituents, not to remember their workers, their spouses, their families, and those sorts of things. So every member of Congress has constituents affected by this. Not to mention that small businesses make up half the economy, and so it's, there's the broader implications. So making it a top priority is what's important. There's going to be a lot of competing things in the next year. But this is one that everybody can agree on and that affects a huge number of people. 26 million is just really hard to ignore.
So as you try to get this, this legislation passed, how important is education? I know obviously your members are aware that this is about to expire.
Yeah.
But do you think small businesses across the board, all around the country, who may be taking advantage of this, are they all aware?
Definitely not. And that, I mean, like any other issue, a lot of times they're busy running their business, not looking at their 1040s. And so that's been one of the things that we've worked on, is making sure that small businesses are educated about what the benefit is that they receive. And every case that I've ever encountered, when they're able to look at it and see the number, they will immediately tell you, this is important to me. Nobody has ever looked at their tax return and said, it's not that big a deal, I could do without it. So it's one of those things that we know that it's impacting them, but people understanding that it's impacting them. I do think awareness is increasing. You just saw the ad that ran. That's important that we make sure that we're educating not just NFIB members, but all small businesses and all folks across the country. And I think that is the awareness is increasing, but it's important that we do things like this here in DC. Like we mentioned, the Ways and Means road teams, we worked with those. We had NFIB members participating in those across the country. So both here in DC and back in the States, it's really important that we continue to communicate the importance of this to members of Congress.
So any thoughts on what those, say, in the room can do, or people watching who might want to advocate?
Yeah, good
or
point.
Against.
Yeah, if you want to advocate against it, I would just recommend you not do that, or just find another issue to dig into. But we do have different audiences. Obviously, there's folks watching online. Some of those may be small businesses, because we've told a lot of folks that we're doing this. And what they didn't talk about today is the stories, and we're going to hear some stories here in a little bit. But if you're watching online, you own a small business or you're a supporter of one, what we hear time and again is tell those stories, write in, call, show up to events. They hear from folks like me all the time. They hear these figures and facts and these studies, and those are important. But the things that they remember are when somebody comes up to them and says, this deduction allowed me to do this. And it's not always building a huge piece of infrastructure, although that's the case sometimes. We heard from somebody in Pennsylvania just a couple weeks ago that it allowed them to buy a van that had air conditioning for their workers. So it's really brass tacks kind of stuff that can get done here. For those in the room, obviously, whether you're touching policy or helping craft it or advising, I would just say, to keep in mind what a small business really is. It's defined in a lot of different ways by a lot of different people and groups, but these are really small entities that rely on this. NFIB members are really around 7 to 8 employees, a lot of sole proprietorships, a lot of family-owned businesses. These are the folks that are impacted by this. There are a lot of other groups or companies that may be able to claim it, but the majority of these 26 million small businesses are truly small businesses on Main Street that are keeping our economy going.
Adam Temple, Senior Vice President for Advocacy for NFIB. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
It is now time for our panel discussion. Please welcome to the stage Alison Couch, owner of Ignite Accounting and Business Advisors, a small business in Atlanta, Georgia; Dana Peterson, the chief economist and leader of the Economy, Strategy, and Finance Center at the Conference Board; Candice Price, co-owner of Home Team Auto Sales in Omaha, Nebraska; and Joby Young, executive vice president at the American Farm Bureau Federation. Welcome.
Well, thank you all for joining us. I know the voice of God, otherwise known as my colleague Lisa, introduced you, but can I go down the line and kind of talk a little bit about your passion on this issue, your affiliation, and what you want people to remember, take away from today?
Absolutely. So my name is Alison Couch, and I own a small business, a small accounting firm in Columbia County, a small town called Harlem, and I help other small business owners. So I'm very aware of the challenges that small business owners face on a personal level, as well as talking with multiple small business owners every day. So this issue has been very, very near and dear to my heart, because I've seen how it's affected small businesses, and it's such a widespread benefit. So the deduction itself has been most beneficial when you compare it to things like depreciation or other tax credits that affect a specific industry, or where depreciation, you have to buy a piece of equipment. this is something that is more widespread horizontally and vertically when you look at the benefit to small business owners.
Hi, my name is Dana Peterson. I'm the Global Chief Economist at the Conference Board. Usually we look at large businesses, but the things that could be coming down the pipeline in terms of impacts on businesses more generally are really important for small businesses. And I'm hoping that I can just shed some light on some of the things that businesses like yourselves should also think about for next year. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Candice Price. I'm a member of NFIB. I'm the co-owner of Home Team Auto Sales, along with my business partner, Ron Devers. One of the perspectives that I'm bringing to today is just that of the small business owner. Someone who bootstrapped to get their business started, someone who knows what it is to not have very much in ways of finances to get things going and keep a business running. But not only keep it running, but also be able to scale and get to the point where you can employ, to get to the point where you are impacting your community. Those are the things that I do. I also serve on the board for our Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce. And so what that means is that I have the opportunity to work with not only small businesses, but large businesses. And so the perspective that I want to make sure everyone knows is that we work together. So this isn't about having a negative effect on large business. We believe in corporations. We believe in what they do to impact our economy. We also just need everyone to believe in what we do as small business owners to impact our economy as well. So I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here and to hopefully help shed a little bit more light on why you should support making this permanent. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joby Young. I'm Executive Vice President of the American Farm Bureau Federation, and we are the voice of agriculture. We're the largest general purpose farm and agriculture organization in the country. Our federation here at the American Farm Bureau, we have 51 state organizations, all 50 states and Puerto Rico, and they are in turn the federation of 2,800 county farm bureaus across the country. So farm families across the country get together, they join their local farm bureau, and they similar to NFIB, they make our policy. Over the last few months, those county farm bureaus across the country have been meeting and having policy development, and our states are meeting now. And in January, we'll have a convention, and we'll get a policy book that gives me and our whole team our marching orders of the things that we need to advocate for. And it might not surprise everybody in the room here that with all those family farms being organized as small businesses across the country, that tax issues and tax treatment, and certainly this issue is an important one. So that's why I'm here today, to bring that perspective, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, and as we've been discussing all morning, small businesses, a bipartisan issue. Kamala Harris talked a lot about small businesses on the campaign trail, as well as Donald Trump. Candice, to you, but also interested in other panelists weighing in, on the ground level, how has this deduction affected small businesses? Adam mentioned something, Kathleen, that was hadn't crossed my mind, just surviving the pandemic. I mean, this country's gone through a lot. And then we had inflation, and we had massive fears of a recession that didn't happen, but a lot of turmoil in the economic world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. One of the main things that was mentioned by Kathleen is just our inability to be able to plan. It's very tough to be able to grow and maintain if you don't know what's coming. And a lot of small business owners are not aware that this deduction is going to go away. And then what do they do as they're planning? One thing that we speak about here a lot is the direct impact of having this deduction, right? What we're able to do. We can employ, we can buy equipment, we can grow, we can do the training that we need to do. But what we don't always talk about is the indirect impact. So my business, for instance, we sell cars. And so we do a lot of business-to-business transactions. So now if your business no longer has this deduction, but you were planning to buy a new truck for your plumbing company, or you were planning to buy another vehicle for one of your administrative assistants, now you can't do that. That impacted my business. So not only now am I not receiving the deduction, I now have to increase my prices, and I now will have less sales as well. So it's the indirect impact. And then what that does in turn, because my business supports our local economy, it supports our local community greatly of North Omaha, I now can't go in turn and take that money to another small business owner or help another individual or family that was depending on my purchase as well. So it's the direct and indirect impact that we're feeling from this. I think that one thing that's been amazing that we have been able to do, because we have had this deduction for these few years, is be able to look at things where, what other employee do I need? And what that allows for a small business owner, it allows them to go home earlier. Why is that important? It affects the family structure. It affects their health when they can get some rest, because now they have an employee. So when the doors close at 5, they can actually go home. I've spent a lot of nights at my business where I'm still there at 11 o'clock in the evening. My business partner and I are still there at midnight. But once we get an employee in place, which we went from having 2 to now having 6 of us, which is a very big deal. So when we say small business, that's what we are. So now we're impacting someone else's home and their finances, which allows us to go home and rest.
Alison, same question to you.
So one of the congressmen mentioned earlier that borrowing power is a challenge for small business owners. And I think that this deduction provides the opportunity to free up cash flow. So that cash flow enables you to make capital investments and hire employees, and that's very important for small business owners, and having the ability to have the funds to do those types of investments.
Mm-hmm. Dana, just from a big macro perspective, this Congress has a lot of challenges ahead. We talked about the debt with the congressman. How is Congress going to juggle all this? Because when you're moving massive, sweeping $1 trillion, and by some estimates, $4 trillion would be extending the tax cuts without adding any sweeteners. Just talk a little bit about that, because every Congress has its challenges, but this one is, I think, more so than normal.
Sure. The big elephant in the room, as you mentioned, is the fact that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 is expiring. Not the corporate taxes, but certainly the small business 20% pass-through tax cut, and also individual taxes, which impact many small business owners as well. So my understanding that most likely the next Congress will look to extend many of those tax breaks, because otherwise we'd have a huge shock. Consumers would see their take-home income reduce significantly. They wouldn't spend as much. Also, that impacts businesses for whom they patronize. And also for small businesses, as we've heard already, it would be a major blow. So I would imagine that this next Congress will look to extend many of these very helpful tax breaks. But it could come at a cost. Certainly that cost could be in terms of reducing spending. And those spending cuts would potentially affect many of your customers and also businesses. And most likely the first place they would look is non-defense discretionary spending. And so that includes a lot of some of our very favorite programs. So I think that's something that small businesses really have to think about in terms of, yes, you might see an extension of these tax provisions, but it might come at the cost of less spending on areas that are critical for small businesses.
What do you think about, just as a quick follow-up, Elon Musk is heading up this panel with Vivek Ramaswamy. Musk wants to cut $2 trillion. That's a lot of money, even in Washington. What is the effect of that? I mean, it seems like as Congress will be moving forward on extending and coming up with a new tax bill that will not only extend but add stuff, also cutting. That's tricky.
Well, it's interesting. The Congressional Budget Office every year produces a lengthy document on ways to reduce spending, as well as ways to raise revenue. So this isn't a new idea. And indeed, this, the two persons who will be participating in this, they're not a government agency. Right. So they're more in an advisory role. But the thing is that they will come up with ideas. And again, some of those ideas, the easiest place to go would be non-defense discretionary spending, but it may also include mandatory spending. And mandatory spending includes provisions for Social Security, healthcare, both for Medicare and Medicaid, which helps to provide healthcare for lower income persons in the U.S. It also could affect big areas such as health, education. These are all things that matter for many people in the United States and also for small business owners. So it's really, they can come up with these recommendations, but it's really how much will Congress push through. And indeed, there are going to be multiple points, I think, next year where Congress will be faced with, okay, do we further increase debt and deficits? to extend taxes and things like that, or do we cut? And indeed, the debt ceiling issue is coming up again in January.
Yep.
And, our Republicans are not the same. Some will say in order to raise a debt ceiling or suspend it, which means we'll look at it in a few years, they may ask for these cuts. And again, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, those provisions expire starting in October of next year. So it's not really clear. So I think it's important for the NFIB and small businesses to speak to their congresspersons and explain how these various cuts or changes will impact your businesses and thereby the U.S. economy. Small businesses make up most businesses in the U.S. They're employing most people, and you really don't want to shut down that engine.
Mm-hmm. Joby, talk about just kind of the feedback you get from the farming community and your members. Are they aware that this could go away? Obviously, farmers were front and center, as far as the election, and Trump talked a lot about farming, and obviously he has big tariff plans as well. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the farming community and the farm families across the country are certainly very aware of this issue. That's why it's a priority of ours, frankly. And 98%, I think, of farms in this country are family farms. 98% are pass-through entities. And they have unique pressures. Some of the other panelists mentioned the pressures of business. I think farming and ranching is unique in a number of ways. It's a uniquely risky business. There's a lot of other businesses that might not be as subject to the variations in the weather and global markets and the availability of labor at exactly the right time when you need it, and so on and so forth. So a lot of risk inherent in that. Another aspect of farming and ranching is that the farmers and ranchers are price takers on both ends in terms of the price of their inputs. They don't have much control over, and then also their product. Mm-hmm. And so when you talk about raising prices in response to tax policy and other things, those levers aren't usually as available. So every dollar and cent matters, and about 50% of farmers and ranchers make use of this particular deduction every year. And a lot of those that aren't making use of it, it's because they didn't have a profit that particular year, which that's part of farming and ranching too. It's a very up and down business, and you have to plan over the long term. Not just the next year or the next 5 years, but for most families out there that are farming, it's a generational thing. And so having control of a variable like this makes a lot of difference when you're one of these small family farms out there, for sure.
Alison, you work directly with other small business owners. What are you hearing, trepidation, concerns about what policymakers should or shouldn't do?
So we're doing tax planning right now for year end for 2024. This time next year, it's going to be a much different conversation that we'll be having. And one of the panelists previous to us spoke about certainty and just having some way to know what is coming up for them. Sure. And also awareness. So I think that events like this are great to get the awareness out there so that small business owners do understand that this is going to be a heavy hit on their tax burden and liability for future years if it's not extended. So those are two important things that need to be looked at and continued as we go into next year.
To that point, and anyone could weigh in as far as Congressman Smucker, said he's an optimist, obviously, that he thinks maybe this could get done by April or May. But how important is it for it to get done before Christmas, based upon planning and that kind of thing?
It's very important for small business owners to do tax planning about this time in the year, even a little bit sooner, actually, in the fall. So that if there are equipment purchases that need to be made or investments that need to be made, they can do that before the end of the year. So if it's at the last hour and we go into even January and it becomes retroactive, that becomes a challenge because then you've missed the opportunity to make those purchases that would have benefited you before year end.
Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Well, I mean, I would concur that in legislation such as this, sooner is always better for that certainty piece. And we talk a lot about that with, things like Farm Bill or the availability of labor or, any of the other issues we're talking about, that the ability to plan ahead of time is always going to be critically important. At least from the agriculture community, there's so many moving pieces. I know there are in small businesses of every type. But when you're from a agriculture perspective, when you're talking about managing a crop year and a tax year and a fiscal year for different things that you're having to take into account, and you had to be in the field while you also had to be around the kitchen table and in the office making these plans. And so having the ability to sequence all that the right way with as much forward planning as possible is critically important.
Candice, as far as tax policy, health policies become a lot more partisan over the years. Not one Republican supported Obamacare, not one Democrat voted for the Trump tax cuts, which is what we're talking about here. Why isn't that more bipartisan? Because as we talked with the two lawmakers, there are bipartisan ideas out there. And even though Congressman Smucker says, which is right, they're going to go down the reconciliation path because they did win everything, margin in the House, very small. Right. Senate margin, 53 seats. It's not 55, not 56, certainly nowhere near 60. Right. Just talk about that, because that could be, in the end all, you never know. Democrats may have to help, and then there's going to have to be a deal if they can't pass things with a narrow majority.
So this is my personal opinion.
Sure.
Democrats should help. They should absolutely help. This affects their constituents. Okay. This affects their country. This affects their community. This affects their main street. Everyone should help. I think that it is unfortunate that this isn't a bipartisan issue. I look at it as a bipartisan issue because who does not have either a small business owner in your family, a small business owner in your friend group, or someone who works for a small business? So that means no matter what, this bill is impacting someone that you know and care for. And that alone should be enough to say, it doesn't matter if it's someone on the other side of the aisle that's supporting this. That's great. They should support it because they have friends and family who this affects as well. And so do I. And so do we. And that should be reason enough to be able to say, I'm just going to simply stand for what's right and for what's good. And this happens to be one of those issues where supporting it is simply what's right and what's good, because it has such a large impact on our economy. We talk through these numbers and the number of small businesses that are out there. What we also are not looking at is the number of small businesses to come. I spend a lot of my time working with those who say, well, I'm thinking about starting a business, or how do I do that? Or I'm thinking about closing my doors. What are my next steps? And I have to talk with them through the possibility or the potential to be able to stay open and what's needed. And at the end of the day, that's what we're talking about here. Are we going to cause individuals to have to close businesses that have been in their families for many years? And you may not look at it that large, but maybe it's simply the mom and pop ice cream shop that you take your child or grandchild to. Maybe it's the lawn service that's in your area and they've been servicing, your family and your community for 10 and 15 years. So now they're having to consider over some of these tax implications whether or not they get to stay in business. And now we're impacting unemployment as well, because one thing that small business owners do well is we employ ourselves. And so that's something we need to be able to continue to do.
Mm-hmm. We will open it up in a little bit for audience questions. This is really for anybody other than Congressman Smucker's bill. What else should Congress do? Danny, you have any thoughts on tax policy, or we talked about government efficiency, but what do you want this next Congress to focus on that maybe is not getting in the headlines?
Absolutely. I think, I'm sorry, was that?
Okay.
Okay.
We'll go down the line.
Okay,
you can start.
Sounds great. Do you want to start, Joe?
Yeah, sure. Well, of course, in the tax policy realm, it's another one of our priorities is the estate tax. Mm-hmm. When in agriculture, where you have such a group of people that has their assets tied up in land that they're using for production, and many times these are generational businesses. That's extremely important. Some of the business expensing provisions are extremely important. I know probably across business, but certainly in agriculture. Outside of tax policy, one of our biggest priorities, probably the biggest priority right now, is a farm bill. We're delayed, as many people in the group here know. We're delayed over a year and have an expired farm bill now, and so we're looking forward to what might be possible in the lame duck, and if not that, then in the new Congress.
Just quickly, what do you think the chances of passing it in lame duck are?
Well, it's tough sledding. And it's probably uphill a little bit too. But I'm paid to be an optimist. I'm paid to find the possible, not the probable. And so we continue to work on those sorts of things. And so we'll see what happens. It's certainly going to be a challenge if it does go into next year to be talking about a tax extension, and then also talk about a farm bill as well. But that's what we're here for, and we'll continue to do that if that comes to pass. So. Farm labor's ever-present issue. For us, it has been for a couple decades in agriculture. Becomes more and more acute every day. And so that's an extremely big issue. And I'll stop there. We got plenty more, but I'll let the others chime in.
Candice?
That's so funny. I think there definitely are plenty.
Yeah.
We appreciate you mentioning those, especially I'm from Nebraska.
Oh, great.
And so, we're heavily ag. And so everything that he's talking through directly impacts exactly where I'm from in the country. Some of the other issues that I think are important as we speak to tax policy and some other issues would definitely be finding funding for some of the programs that support small business, such as the SBA, needing additional funding, but also simply when we talk about regulation. One of the issues that's important with NFIB is the Big Brother Overreach Act. And so the thing that should be remembered is when you're talking with small business owners, we just don't have a lot of time or a lot of hands, which means if you're adding to regulations for us to get through anything that we're looking to accomplish, it makes it so much tougher. And that means we're also now not doing what we're here to do, and that's simply run the business, right? That's simply to grow the business because we're stuck in other regulation that needs to be done. But also when we talk through tax credits that are possible, whether it's for hiring or for training our employees, I think those are some of the issues that are very important that we have an opportunity to look at over this next cycle.
Dana?
Sure. Just picking up on regulation, most likely there will be lots of deregulation. So that should help small businesses as well as large businesses. But there are two areas that I think Congress should take a more active role in, or at least advisory role to the extent that they can. It's certainly around tariffs and also around labor. With respect to tariffs, it is very likely that we may see outsized tariffs on imports. And that will affect anyone who imports goods, either finished products or inputs. Certainly, if we see tariffs of 60% on Chinese imports, that reduces GDP by about 1.2 percentage points. That's a lot of lost growth. It also raises the unemployment rate and hikes up inflation. We just experienced a very inflationary period. I'm sure most people don't want to go back to that period. So to the extent that Congress can act as an advisory to the next administration to help moderate some of these ideas, I think would be great. And the other thing is labor. Certainly when we go back to the first administration, there was a big focus on labor, both undocumented persons as well as high-end H-1B visas. So if we see a return to that, we could see a challenge for many businesses that depend upon foreign workers, especially finance, science, but also industries that are dependent upon lower skilled workers. So if you see this kind of dragnet that's pulling everybody in and everyone's afraid, you could see workers just kind of disappear. And so I think it'd be really helpful for Congress to also play a role in helping to temper some of those aspirations.
What's on your wish list?
So, tax credits and deductions are so beneficial for small business, but I'm going to echo what some of my fellow panelists have said, and even more so than the credits and the deductions is the ability to let the business owner do their work and run their business. And that can be accomplished by cutting the red tape and the bureaucracy, specifically this BOI reporting. If we can see that come off and allow business owners to use that time to run their business. If we can use some of the funding that has gone to the IRS to fund new agents and things of that nature, to actually answer the phones and answer questions and prevent the long wait times that my clients face when they do have a question.
I've heard about those long wait times. I think we've all been on those wait lines.
So,
Yes.
3 hours to ask one payroll question is tough. So that would be a good use of those dollars versus some of the ideas that have already been proposed on using those dollars. As well as, just, for example, I had the opportunity to testify before a field trial last year with the Ways and Means Committee and proposed the idea of raising the dollar amount required for 1099. So it was $600.
Right.
Congressman Jason Smith raised that up to $1,000. Looking at little ways like that to keep
That's a
that
big
red
deal.
tape and bureaucracy
Yeah.
down. Absolutely.
Why don't we open up to audience questions? We have a mic going around. If you can identify yourself. Okay, we'll go
We
to
have one from
Lisa.
our online audience
Okay.
first. This is from Lilith Awason from UTHSC College of Dentistry. Why wasn't this tax cut made permanently to begin with?
Anyone want to tackle?
Wow. What was the question?
Why are we talking about extending? Why wasn't it permanent? And some of that deals with the inside baseball game of reconciliation. But if it is bipartisan, then obviously there's more certainty.
I think a lot of it had to do with the expense. If you think about it, the amount that's expiring is equivalent to anywhere from $3 to $5.2 trillion, right? And that's excluding the permanent tax cuts that were made for larger corporations. And so when it comes to pushing a bill through Congress, you have to have compromises. And I think that that was one compromise, but with the understanding that, once we get there, to 2026, the fiscal year 2026, that Congress would extend these things. But, that's always the thought that, don't worry about it. When we get to it, we'll deal with it. But now we're here.
Yeah.
And so that's the big question. Are we willing to allow deficits and debt to expand further by allowing all of these provisions to be extended? That's the long-term pain. But in the short run, if you don't extend them, there's a major shock to the economy.
Sure.
And you're cutting several percentage points off of growth and massively affecting individuals, businesses large and small. So that's the reason why it wasn't done, to get it done in the first place. But now we're here. We need to address this.
Question right there.
Is this working? No.
Yeah.
This one is. There we go. I feel like Vanna White. Jonathan Katz, Department of Labor, Office of Disability Employment Policy. In our outreach with particularly entrepreneurs with disabilities and with small businesses that are hiring workers with disabilities, we've heard a lot about the difficulty of accessing tax credits, in this case, the Disabled Access Tax Credit and the WOTC. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of just what more broadly you're seeing, not just in terms of, as Candice, you said, the time or hands to handle the regulations, but also the time and hands to even handle the accessing some of these tax credits, whether with businesses like yours, Alison, or those who are doing it independently.
Well, just a general thought, and thank you for your service at DOL, and thank you for being here and engaging on these issues. But whether it's a tax credit, whether it's a DOL program, I talked about labor, and so certainly it's an important agency for us. The policy certainly is important, but then also the ability for a small business person or anybody else in America that has to interact with the government anyway to actually navigate these programs. And so I worked at USDA once upon a time, and a big focus of ours when we were there was this efficiency, effectiveness, customer service aspect, because it's a challenge. And so bringing that efficiency to it so that somebody can actually realize the benefits and access the programs is extremely important. I appreciate you bringing up the point. At least if you're a farmer out in Nebraska or Georgia or somewhere, you do have to be you're a farmer, you're a meteorologist, you're a hydrologist, you're an agronomist, you're an HR professional, and oh, by the way, you're an accountant too, and a regulatory expert. So you have to be able to do all these things, and making sure that they're formulated so that they can actually be accessed, whether it's a tax credit or a labor program, for instance, is extremely important.
Absolutely. And of course, I see the value of having a good public accountant because that's my profession. But it's also important to just plug yourself into continuing education programs and really stay abreast of the latest and greatest programs that are out there, and whether that be classes or going online and following up on ideas and programs that you hear are available.
Joby, just talk about a little bit about the challenges in rural America. I thought your 98% stat was very interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people here on the East Coast think broadband's everywhere and it's accessible. But what do you hear about that? And are politicians paying more attention to that?
Sure. Well, you know, there's any number of challenges, of course. Broadband's one of those, whether you're a small business in town or whether you're, certainly if you're out on the county line, you're farming and ranching, especially as, you know, more technologies come online when you're using a drone and data-heavy applications and trying to make use of those sorts of things. That's certainly important. There's any number of other challenges. A couple of stats that are certainly concerning in the farm and ranching community out in rural America are, you know, two things I would mention to the group. The USDA does a census of agriculture every 5 years. The last one was in 22. Between 2017 and 22, we lost 140,000 farms in this country, and so a lot of, and that's as you might guess, that's a lot of your smaller, medium-sized farms that have more trouble making. Realizing economies of scale and making things pencil. So that's part of why we're all here today, because that's certainly part of it. And another piece is that there's probably about 4 times as many farmers and ranchers that are at or above retirement age than there are folks that are under 25. So I think it's about 1.3 million farmers and ranchers that are at or above retirement age, 300,000 at 25. So, you know, that's certainly a challenge too. We want folks to be moving to rural America. We want them to be entering farming and ranching, starting farms. And then, you know, one spouse may go work in town, run a business in town, and that brings that vitality and vibrancy to rural America. So that's why these issues are so important, because I mentioned, you know, if you're looking at what your career is going to be, and you're looking at being an entrepreneur or being a farmer, and you're thinking about all, you know, having to wear all those hats I just mentioned a moment ago and take on all that risk and have the ability to go to a bank and sign a note that might be pretty intimidating, versus going, you know, to a different way that might be a little more, you know, less intimidating. You're weighing that. So we want to bring people into being entrepreneurs. We want to bring them into for us into the farm and ranching community. We benefit for decades from having the most affordable, available, nutritious food supply in the entire world. We spend less of our take-home dollars as Americans on food, and that comes from having this sort of integrated, diversified, stable farm economy out there across rural America, and we want to preserve that.
That's interesting, because every event we almost touch upon it in every one about the aging workforce and how it's affecting and challenging every industry. Well, we've run out of time. Please thank our great panelists for joining us this morning. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of our program. Thanks to all of our wonderful speakers this morning. On behalf of The Hill and our sponsor, NFIB, we'd like to thank everyone who joined us here in person and those of you who tuned in online. If you missed any portion of today's discussion, the full event video is available on thehill.com. Thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.